to New York City now, where the first of 4 criminal trials facing Donald Trump got underway today. The former U.S. president and presumptive Republican nominee facing 34 counts of falsifying business records. It's a scheme that was allegedly devised to conceal a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Ms. Daniels alleges she had an affair with Donald Trump, one that he denies, and the state alleges the money was used to keep damaging information away from the American public ahead of the 2016 election.
This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. And that's why I'm very proud to be here. This is an assault on our country.
Well, with more, we're now joined by Jessica Roth, who is a former U.S. federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. Ms. Roth, thank you for making the time today.
It's my pleasure to join you.
Listen, I wanted to start here with some context. Given that this case is up against more serious criminal indictments that the former president faces, how important is this case on its own merits and what it might teach us about the other cases still to come?
Well, I don't think anybody really expected that this would be the first case to go to trial among the 4 criminal cases that have been brought against the former president. But here we are. It was the first one that was filed. The district attorney who filed this case had expressed his willingness to postpone it, while the federal cases that involve much more serious charges surrounding the January 6th insurrection and efforts to overturn the election results went forward. But those are on hold, at least the federal one in the District of Columbia, while the U.S. Supreme Court decides whether the former president has immunity from criminal prosecution. And the case involving the 2020 election in Georgia is also essentially on hold in the sense that the court is busy deciding various motions and hasn't scheduled a trial date. And the case in Florida involving national defense information also doesn't have a firm trial date, and the court there is also consumed with motions. So here we are. This one is going forward. The charges are far less serious than those in the other cases, but they involve falsification of business records with the intent to conceal another crime. And the way that the district attorney is framing this case, that other crime is allegedly efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election through donations that were essentially made by Michael Cohen to President Trump's campaign in the form of payments to Stormy Daniels, who alleged she had had an affair with the former president. And the payments were to keep her quiet so that the public would not know about that information on the eve of the election. And right after the so-called Access Hollywood tape had been revealed, when the Trump campaign was in full damage control mode. So the basis for these state charges in New York is that Trump, working with others, falsified the records of the Trump organization to conceal that they were in fact reimbursing Michael Cohen for these payments to Stormy Daniels that the district attorney says amounted to unlawful campaign donations because they exceeded the amounts that an individual was permitted to donate to the campaign. Mm-hmm. So there we have it. It's actually in some ways fairly complex and in some ways fairly straightforward.
Well, to all of that, though, it's complex or straightforward. Donald Trump has described this trial and all others that he faces as Democrats weaponizing the justice system to impede his reelection. So how does the court proceed to ensure that is not the public impression? Do the courts even care?
Well, this court is going to be very careful in selecting jurors. One of the things I think that's notable about the jury selection process that is now just underway is that the court is not going to be asking the potential jurors which political party they affiliate with, if they do, or for whom they cast a vote in the last 2 presidential elections, or even if they voted. So the court's going to be making an effort to not make this about politics, but rather to discern whether or not the jurors who are ultimately chosen can be fair and impartial in deciding this case and rendering a verdict based solely on the evidence that will be presented in court and the arguments that will be presented by counsel. So what's going to be happening in front of the jurors in this courtroom is going to be all about the evidence, all about the facts, with a real effort to keep the politics out of it. I think that's going to be a challenge for the court to maintain those limits. And for the prosecution, it is likely going to be the former president's effort and his lawyer's effort to bring the politics in. But it's been quite clear in pretrial filings and orders that the court is going to make every effort to keep the politics out.
Well, almost guaranteed we'll be getting daily, hourly, if not up-to-the-minute commentary from the former U.S. president here. But, you know, if convicted in this case, Donald Trump, face 4 years in jail at most. You said state charges. Is this a crime that he can forgive himself if he becomes the U.S. president?
No, he can't. I mean, that's part of the federal system in the United States, is that the U.S. president, although he could, in theory, order his attorney general to stop a federal prosecution, and although in theory he could try to pardon himself if he were convicted, or even frankly before he were convicted of federal charges, he does not have that power with respect to charges brought by state prosecutors. And so that is quite important to note as this case goes forward, that even if he were elected president, he would not be able to pardon himself from any conviction in these charges.
Okay, you say even if he were to be elected U.S. president, does that mean then this trial could last beyond the next U.S. vote?
I don't expect that this particular trial in New York that's just underway now will last beyond 2 months. The current estimate is about 6 weeks. It could be 2 months, but that would still be comfortably before the November election. It's not clear at all, however, that any of the other 3 pending criminal cases against the former president will get to trial before the November election. So this could be it.
This could be it. But if he is convicted, would it disqualify him in any way from the presidential race?
No. I mean, it's one of the fascinating features of U.S. law is that there's actually no legal disqualification from running or holding the presidency for somebody who's been convicted of a crime, even a felony. There are political consequences potentially in terms of whether people would vote for somebody who's been convicted of a felony, but legally there's no bar. There would be very important issues that would have to be worked out if he were in fact convicted and sentenced to some form of incarceration, about whether that could go forward once he was elected to office, if he were and sworn in. I think most people who have looked into this have come to the conclusion that it would not be possible for him to be incarcerated, especially under a state sentence, if he were president, because it would infringe on his performance of his constitutional duties. So essentially, as a separation of powers issue and a supremacy clause issue, it would be impossible for courts to rule that he should be detained while president. But the situation has never arisen before in our history, and it's hard to imagine getting to that point.
Jessica Roth, of course, we're watching from north of your border, but thank you for this. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.